Good morning to you. Gate gate para som gate body so tayata gate para som gate body so tayata gate para som gate body so Om Mani Mani Mahamani 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 Om Mani Mani Mahamani so Sunja damje do todala na machi ba sanje ko ba ko je chiri ya to ba cha tie che den cha ju sa la de na su jin na ko la wa le shin ba la to ji shu ma no wa ko ka su bo den cha la ma tong ga ba chen de se ba la lu chi ba sanje ke de na je chi ni sa na set our motivation to do whatever we possibly can to attain the peerless state of enlightenment by being able to perfect all the trainings on the Bodhisattva path. And with that in mind, I intend to really train in these, to study them, to gain an understanding of them based on a perfect and unmistaken presentation. And so it is with this in mind that I am here this morning to listen to an explanation based on the outlines of the great treatise on the stages of the path to enlightenment, as composed by the great protector Lama Tsongkhapa. Shokran Gyatang Abjungap Nigan, the parting the Sherapi parting. Ngani. Gilgera. 다다데 가서지 가서래 파진 두고 나네다 지가서데 가서데 다다데 당분간 따로서 쉬사버체 다다데 파진 냠래다 나 버두버디 좋아 셔럽게 파진 냠래 또 어디 셔럽게 파진 거디 다들 대체시 쉬었지 안 되죠 다치다 저 리베 좀네 개바데 이게 한동의 subject도 다단다지 나비치 보는데서 마치 저 subject 안디게 저 다단다지 로다 란주 미버체베 가서다 다가제 제소 파젠투 신주 미버체베 두여 모부시스 어디게 저 안디게 저 다가제 저 가서다 신라니다 개침부 인베인사 아니 스토도 subject 제제 다가제 봐 So we have been looking at the introduction to, the understanding and indeed the practice of the 6 perfections. And, now having covered the first 5 of these, we will briefly look at the 6th, which is the perfection of wisdom. Now, normally at this stage in a presentation of the graduated path teachings, one would introduce the topic of special insight or superior insight, and in terms of the kind of importance given to both meditative serenity and special insight. Relating to the 5th and 6th perfections, they are kind of dealt with kind of like later and slightly later than the actual presentation of the 6 perfections themselves. And so following the general presentation of the 6 perfections, which are
under the category of the practices needed in order to ripen one's own continuum. And then they will be followed by the 4 ways of accumulating disciples, which fall under the category of practices needed to ripen the continuums of others. And thereafter then will be a more detailed presentation of both meditative serenity and special or superior insight.
기부 딩다 기부 챔비 기부 딩다 기부 충분히 이게 택바 챔비 남라 티에체도 이번 인자 아니 택바 챔비 가서 다시 셰랍다 땡은이 기부 가서 택바 챔비 가서 쏜 것도 와 정말이잖아 기부 딩 가서네 기부 딩러 가서다 추dim제 땡은이 셰랍 남라 봐서 냠슬랑 거고요 다 셰랍다 땡은이 쏜고 요래 쏜고 요래 이내 단다데 기부 충무 장길 남라 치고 기부 딩게 장길 남라 치고 근데 말봐 네가 투모가 남잖아 다 네가 그거 기부 챔비 남라 치지 뭐 인자 아니 다들 셔랍다 되는 지금 니부터 셔랍 가서 송거에 내수 된지 싫었어
So normally the 5th and 6th of the perfections, the meditative concentration and wisdom, are dealt with in detail in relation to the teachings relating to the medium capacity being. And that, however, in the context of the great treatise of the stages of the path to enlightenment, Lam Rim that we have been the outlines of which we are using here, they are dealt with in the context of the greater capacity being teachings. And so this is also to bring into, again, remind us that the teachings relating to the being of smaller capacity and the medium capacity being are delineated as teachings in common with the being of smaller capacity and in common with the being of medium capacity. So implicit in that is the understanding that thereafter these teachings of the smaller capacity and medium capacity are for the purpose of serving the teachings of the being of greater capacity. And so all of what is actually explicitly taught in the context of the beings of smaller and medium capacity is now coming to play for the sake of the teachings relating to the being of greater capacity. And so this is where we are, this is the context in which we are dealing with these teachings, and specifically the 5th and 6th of the perfections. So that's in relation to the first of those, meditative concentration. We have dealt with that by and large. And so now it's the perfection of wisdom, the 6th of the perfections, and of course this is of paramount importance. And in general we speak about 2 different categories of wisdom, conventional and ultimate wisdom.
그것도 군조배 싫어도 된다배 싫어도 다 맞아 말한 쪽에 저기 대화 되고 요래 동행 되고 요 말에 아니 대화도 동행 세게한테 아니 제 가서도 다 영화 쇼스나 영화에서 말봐 다 뒤에서 뒤줄을 낳고 요래 안티 미팅쇼 빵고 요래 안티에서 싫으면은 탐에 그지라도 와 다시 싫어들 군조배다 지금 저 가서 군조배 출근 라신되게 대 시고에 개체부 차고 요래 이내 군조배 내단 이 시고에 개체부 이바 쌈마세 되는다면 라신 그 내로 타도도 근데지르샤 뭐 맞아 뭐 마시 봐이나 아니 디 온게 뭐 마시 온 투바용 투베 온게 아니 대화 되고 요때 아니 대외 동에 좀 마시 밑에 동에 때 동에 좀빵 마시 봐자다 강아지 채되고 요 봐.
So we all want happiness, and we don't want suffering. Now we know to a certain extent that just saying, "Oh, please grant me happiness," is not going to do it for us. We need to actually accumulate the causes of happiness to be guaranteed that happiness will ripen, will eventuate. And so that's in terms of wisdom, where wisdom comes into this, of course, it is very helpful to have a good understanding of conventional wisdom, and to kind of like understand the kind of different ways in which that integrates with our desires for happiness, and indeed our ability to overcome sufferings as well. But we really need to really gain a very clear ascertainment of ultimate wisdom, to understand what the final state of status of phenomena is, and that because of our mistaken understandings in relation to the ultimate wisdom, that our endeavors for happiness and our endeavors to avoid suffering are often come to naught, and we often find that we are kind of unfulfilled.
니동 두자서 쪼대도 다 디고는 다가 나로는 다 지게 힌두고 줄로만 부여래. 근데 되게 돼 따와 다 가라 간사비 띵사고 요래. 가라 간사비 띵사고 요래. 아니 즉 가라 간사비 띵사고 요래. 얘네 다 된대게 띵사보다 된대게 내세 가라 간사비 롱게지 예매도 아니 뭐여게 내세 때라 또 튕게 야치 말아. 튕게 야치 말아. 근데 되게 두주 되지라 다 생겨 좀 되대. 다 가서대 다 간제자 다다데 쉐탐제게 내로 군조베 내로다 된다베 내로고 디나네 된다베 내로고 때라 파빈바 다 된다베 내로 때라 파바레데 이내야 뒤제 감담에바 나초바지 인자 남자 복초조 요 말이다 남자 복초조 매뒤 아니 데 안다 가자지게 가서래 뒤제 감다 튀베 원내다 아니 지금 마 티수 정도도 왔던 거 그래서 다음에 그 라바데 아니 되네 차차 때까지 좀 다시 내다 용탕식 되다 다 공부 타도 받대 성격 좀 되고 공부 타도 받대 단주배 따와디 말이다 다 단주배 따와디 인데 이나 헛 강가 단주배 따와대서 요런 차고서 차고 요 말고 가라 간상게 아니 지금 내세 띵사고 삼도 당도 것이다 지고도 와 내세 가라 간상 롱 것이 고도 와 근데 이번 연자 다 뒤야 아니 배 산제 송화선 방 삼을 참마셔버제 리벨라가 때려 박지 아니 딜배 맞다 산제 아니 저 만냥을 때도 로십잖아 아니 고블루도 페그레스 아니 고블루도게다 산제게 따와 타도데 아니 때려 파네 다 오래다 때려 파네 소다 때려 리벨라네 때려 파본 것도 와 어디서
So therefore, it's very important to understand the kind of wisdom in the context of its conventional manifestation, its ultimate manifestation, and to kind of really understand that, we need to go back to like the way in which the Buddha disseminated this most profound information 2,600 years ago. And as we spoke last week or a few weeks ago about having the kind of necessary conditions available so that such explanation could be assimilated by the people of the time, and how India, in the many different schools of Hinduism and the kind of the way in which thought had been developed within several of these schools to such an extent that they were very profound, very deep thinking, and so they could understand what the Buddha was talking about and assimilate the final view at that point, be able to ascertain that. But also it's because the Buddha understood that the disciples who were listening were of a very varied dispositions and capacities, personalities, etc. That he described this kind of topic in at various levels of subtlety and profundity, so that for those who he could understand, could understand the general concept, but not the most subtle level of it, he taught sort of a coarse level of selflessness. And so in this way arose the different pronouncements of the Buddha according to the different audiences that were there, and from that arose the tenet schools, four separate tenet schools of thought, each one progressively more subtle in relation to their presentation of selflessness, until we get to the prasangika Madhyamika point of view, the most subtle and final understanding of the Buddha's thought on this particular topic. And indeed the Buddha prophesied the coming of Nagarjuna some 400 years after him as the one who would collate, classify and really gain the kind of final ascertainment of his thought, and indeed he did.
nga de nyanga de lo ship che lo ko lu du pe de anu ko lu du ge ane di ta ka se u me ta wa de ri la ne sa wa chi ge sta ka je chi ka so re di ge che bu si ne ro ge che bu si ne ta ge che bu re ro ka sa ngar so mi de be tu nge de pa de o de se che na tu sa de le la tu yo le de pa de nyomo lo tu yo 그래서 너무 독성을 두고 디파대죠. 내 군조다 너무 군조도 파대죠나. 난 단지 머리발아 두고 있대. 단지 머리바디 못해네. 단지 머리바디 못해네. 아니 디 유근데 유디 못해네. 아니 디 유디 매바치라 여버지네. 안 디 온게 아니 차단 온게 레사에 온게 밑에 동에 나 소가지 용한테고 여인자 다디 계속 싶자디 뭐 맞춰고 봐도 아니 디반투면 도 그래서 코에 자와 타도 받는 거 맞춰고 봐도 반투면 아니 반투면 코에 자와 타도 받는 거 전에 엔디니보다 감에 좀 싫어 이거든 딱 이제 지금 왜 라면 때는 라면 다 개츠부 시부지 뭐 인사지 별라면 때는 편네 다들 지고 요바데다 지 가서도 막 지가서도 나라도 기부 패바지 나라도 패바지가 남자 뭐 쳐줘지 매버렸다 뭐 쳐줘 매버 인자 다디 가서도 뭐 쳐야 쳐도 아니 배 나라도는 가서 학교 되고 용해 쳐도 아니 말 제시에 별라면 패세고 시부지 좀 게치다 거불로 또 패이 바로 와 pay but what would it
so this, how would you say, the intricacy of the dissemination really of the teachings or the doctrine on emptiness is properly complex to answer to speak to the importance of what was being taught. And the Buddha, understanding this, could see that even at his time it was kind of difficult for people to get the final understanding of what he meant. And so he prophesied the coming of Nagarjuna some 400 years later, who would, through examining and analysing all of what was available, be able to come to the final meaning of what the Buddha intended, known as the Madhyamaka, or the middle way point of view, and presented in such a way that it was now easier to understand for people. And so this was extremely important, that this clarification process to understand that when you really analyzed into reality, you met with the law of cause and effect, the karma of the situation. And below that, you understand this was the karmas began with the laying down of imprints due to the mental afflictions. And so there are many different mental afflictions, but when you analysed into them, you realised that at the root of those mental afflictions was a particular ignorance in relation to the true nature of reality. And that that from that recognition is, of course, absolutely primary, of absolute paramount importance initially. And so it's from the clarification process from Arya Nagarjuna that we are able to gain this recognition, because without recognizing the problem, you won't do anything to overcome the problem. And so it's kind of like really important that we see how this has come about over kind of the centuries as well, and to see that that our issue is here of the ignorance of apprehending or grasping onto something as existing that doesn't actually exist at all. And that from that tragic mistake arises then the subsequent attachments and aversions that lead to the mental afflictions, that lead to the imprints that create the karma, that keep us revolving in cyclic existence, etc. So it's this really this kind of recognition of what the problem is, in order to be able to do something about and being able to abandon or overcome that. And so we see the problem, we apply the antidote, we recognize that that is a wisdom of selflessness. So this is so important to recognize, and that which has been clarified, so that it is far more accessible, as it were, by our intelligence, due to the blessing from Arya Nagarjuna.
이네 상계 좀 되네 상계 좀 되네 셰슈베 가수야 셰지도 가수야 딱 저 되게 용자게 되게 용자가 맞춰 되는데 저어디 발리 주주셔 되는 거예요. 발리 주주셔 다 되네 되게 도스다 가서 도스 가서 저기 거소라다 저기 사토볼을 내게 야 내가 토볼을 내게 돼서 아니 제가 집에 치 그러다 코를 쏘어터데 아니 저기 가서다다 제레스다 차나 도제다 그래서 장주세베 나바 때잖아 평구도 와 와다 되제 지다 미에 요때 이내야 되벨하 되게 슈처부 유팅했지 슈처부 유팅했지 다 상하게 되는 하장이다 싸웠잖아 다 상교 좀 된데 아니 저 가서데 다 뒤져 레다 된데서 안 하이 나바데 이단 걸 하이 나바데 나야지 어디서 다 가제 저 다들 데리가산 내시 집에 용자 택과 친구 취다 상가서 용자 어디데 매버체체 시부지 배 상와체네 요 그래서 뒤제 감다 매바다 참바체네 아니 나바데는 최대한 것도 와 최대한 것도 와
And so that point again is reinforced also through an understanding of indeed how the Buddha taught when the Buddha was alive in this world, and that we can see that the kind of vast majority of the teachings, or the teachings given to the vast majority of willing disciples, are those that are contained in what we now know as the Pali tradition, and that the teachings that we now know as the Mahayana were given to a much fewer number of those on higher levels who were capable of, had a larger capacity to accept those teachings. And of course, what we know as Tantra teachings were given really in secret, indeed, as the Buddha, in the aspect of a deity, giving those teachings to a very select number. And indeed, when we look at even the Mahayana retinue who were accepting or attending teachings given by the Buddha, very esteemed personalities such as Avalokiteshvara, Vajrapani, Manjushri, etc. And indeed, even though there were many humans there as well who had the capacity to accept these teachings, to assimilate these teachings, the vast majority of those attending were actually desire realm celestial beings who had the capacity to hear these teachings. So, what the point is here, that it's unlike nowadays when the Mahayana teachings and indeed Tantric teachings are available to the general public. In those days, and in particular in the context of the Buddha's teachings, the Buddha taught precisely according to the capacity of those who were listening, according to their individual dispositions and personalities. So they got what they were able to handle. And so this is in the context of the teachings on wisdom as well, that how they were disseminated at the time of the Buddha, and then 400 years later with the coming of Nagarjuna.
산제가 송아데 아니 뒤자 코란게 캄게 온게 아니 다 저가서 자치 좀 나서 가지고 거들도 와. 그래서 산제가 송이 캐줘요. 송진이도 송매제 도만이도 소소고 송에 송직 송아이네 배나 미다바 송아이 배나 놀 미다바스 라바이나 놀기 미다바 고바이나 배나 다베트 소라지게 다음에가 고쳐 버려. 송직이다 소소도 캄다 좀 먹고 돼요. 이 산제가 송이 캐줘요.
And so this is also to emphasize that the Buddha did not teach from his own desire to teach. Actually, the teachings were really demarcated precisely according to the capacity of each disciple, what each disciple's disposition was. And so having said that, it's also true that because of the blessing of the Buddha's speech, and that the Buddha might teach one topic, but again it would be understood again differently according to those different disciples who were listening. So for example, if he made the pronouncement that null is impermanent, that might be understood by David as at the level of selflessness. And so this is the kind of indeed the blessing of the Buddha's speech. And so one of the characteristics of the Buddha's speech is that it is understood according to the individual dispositions of those who are listening.
산제베게 ene jaga sanje rangi tembe chen nal chachaba ine ene ngedön da 장dön 용거에 내 주디와 ngedön da 장dön 용 되게 요래 ngedön da 장dön 용거에 대 가서는 그래서 뒤제 컴 민자와 인바 인자 ene 컴다 투베 최된 거 요 인자 ene 강가 ngedön 보고 요 말이야 장dön 용거 요래 어딘데 좋아 다 ngedön 바시 때바 이나 뒤제 컴다 미투바 인바 감당 밑에 최지 때문에 있는 데는 편도고 말와. 편마도나 아니 최 때문에 고바 좀 마서 와.
This also explains why we have now in the whole canon of the Buddha's teachings those that are known as definitive teachings and those that are known as interpretative teachings. And this is because, again, the Buddha taught according to the different capacities, the different dispositions of individuals, and understood that if a disciple didn't have the capacity to hear a definitive teaching, there was no point in giving a definitive teaching, because they wouldn't be able to get it, they wouldn't be able to ascertain the meaning of that, it wouldn't be of any benefit to them.
아니 타바 요 말에 탐지 첨바 요 말에서는 구아대 되고 아니 람라 그 말에 아니 편도 좀 가서 딜레 코란도 그때 여러 때마 두고도 삼사지기 대대가 삼류 시대 주여 인자 대대 삼류 숙처부 주여 인자 아니 내가 때마 두버래 때마 두버레스 마테 되게도 다 때마 두버다 때마 두버레스 라바이나 아니 딜라 때네 아니 타바다 탐지 첨바디 로가 차투예지 안 딜라 때는 수좀 소야다 람라 라베지 용투예지 타타지 다 타투나 데마 두바 데마 데야 아니 추거라지 타도 데마 메바도베 아니 탑수 주조에 주고도 다디 수좀 소저 간자서는 소남 체데 줘 레상다 상어도 간자서 모유기 내주 도를 누가 체데 주고도 와 아니 타도디 되게 라시 메바도베 귤로 줘티도 와
Perhaps this is most evident in the content of the different tenet schools, and that we can see the Buddha teaching interpretatively in relation to the meaning of reality, the status of the self, in the context of the Vaibhashika school of tenets and the Sutantrika school of tenets and the Chittamatran school of tenets indeed. And for those proponents of those tenets, the fact that there was kind of phenomena were truly existent was considered appropriate for them to understand, to teach. Because if the Buddha taught them that things lacked any true existence, the more subtle point of view, they would not be able to really ascertain such a subtle understanding. That would then they would kind of fall into a more nihilistic point of view, completely discouraged about what the point. There's no point in being able to practice, to accumulate merit and so on, because things lacked any existence at all. That would be their extreme point of view, and so the Buddha avoided that by teaching to their capacity, their disposition, that actually phenomena truly existed. And this was a skillful means to an end. That, of course, the Buddha understood that eventually they would be able to reach a point where they could really penetrate to understand that actually phenomena lacked any true existence. But for now, he left them with a point that they felt safe with. That they would say, okay, things truly exist, therefore I can practice the path, I can practice ethical conduct, and so on and so on. And so while they were doing that earnestly, with great confidence, they would be purifying obscurations, purifying negativities, and then opening up really the capacity to be able to take in a more subtle understanding of reality, to the point where so at some point they would be able to handle the fact that things lacked any true existence. And so it's very important to kind of really see that this is kind of a means to an end, and this is the kind of context in which the Buddha taught interpretative as well as definitive teachings.
Samlu nese kase yaje tuya tsuke ani ngoyu ki nesu tongye la niwa shuk chet tuwa niwa shuk chet tuwa ani ka namshina o tenpa tumna ta ani ko gyujin le ten koye mintu samsam chige ta chige tawe gowa di lewan tu ani rangi nyemege tenpa tumba zibe tawa ti do tuwa ko samlu nese shuk chet tuwa 그 팬도 좀 되기도 그 당분에 간주배 따와 댄사가 노로인다 되게요 다 뒤맹게 질라 다 뒤때바이나 그 체달로에 내가 요바에서 체달에 잡에 체달에 잡네 아니 그 지금 내가 추정소에 다 수바 고미라 수바 제소가 냠내면 무제요로 와 대대게 때네 아니 그 지금 니바티 숙체도 줘도 가서 뭐 이제 좀 시도 그거 와 다들 지금 다들 그냥 잡을래 나로라 출루 다 남과 매매 남과 맞아다 출루 뭐 부시고 봐 출루 되게 뒤에 컴퓨터 투바 용 되게 도와 컴퓨터 투바 용 되도 아니 컴퓨터 투바 돈에 거라도 출루 디켈레 베톤에 아니 추진 소에 서바 거기에 아니 제 잡아대 니제 냠내 제 니좀 뭐 좀 되게 도와 다디에서 다다디 태바 챔비게 최전에 직대와이나 아니 산지가 출라야 산지만 남편주야 감도 뒤에 감도 매번 민자 온게 아니 지금 다와 민자와 지 용되게 나세가 다와 민자와 용되게 될라데는 나 저번에 출루 시바 출래 다 용초로 와 다디에서 아니 그거다 지고 레시도 와
So that with the practice of what one feels safe to practice, and the engagement with the Dharma at a level that one feels confident to engage with, one will, in kind of with genuine practice, as kind of really access more and more subtle levels of understanding for oneself, especially in relation to what really constitutes the actual reality of a situation. And so at some point, say for these lower schools of tenets, having practiced on the basis of the fact that things truly existed, will come to a point of really a kind of where they will see the inconsistency of holding on to true existence and abiding by the law of cause and effect, because they will see that if things truly exist, then it sort of really negates the whole efficacy of cause and effect. So they will see that these are incompatible, and so they start to kind of really look into things in a great deal more detail, and actually see that things lack any true existence, and that is the point that is in perfect harmony with the workings of cause and effect. So this is how gradually this comes about, and that in other words, that through one's practice of ethics, the level of kindness and so on, that one starts to lessen and even obliterate the obscurations to one's own understanding at the higher levels. So this is important to understand it when we come to look at even different religious traditions and spiritual traditions in the world today, that are still extant in the world today, that you can see that these have arisen according to the individual dispositions and personalities of followers, and that they are replete with teachings on kindness, love, compassion, good ethical conduct, and so on. And so, and the and we can see that this is kind of the way of the spiritual world, that teachings are given according to or arise in terms of the disciples that can follow those teachings. And it's thus it is with the different viewpoints that the Buddha expounded, that what it was according to the capacities of the disciples that were listening to him at the time. And so we can see that because this is the case within Buddhism, it is valid, it is to be respected and appreciated, and therefore in all of the spiritual traditions other than Buddhism around the world, that they are also worthy of the same respect and appreciation. Having said that ultimately one will have to engage with and ascertain the prasangika and madhyamika, or the middle way, a consequence school point of view, because one has to deal with, if one wants to overcome suffering completely, the root of suffering, and that grasping at the true existence of a self-entity, and thereafter apply the antidote of the wisdom of selflessness. So in relation to the presentation here, the perfection of wisdom, it has 5 subheadings. 1, the nature of wisdom. Secondly, the means by which we enter into the development of wisdom. Thirdly, the divisions of wisdom. Fourthly, how to practice wisdom. And fifthly, summary of the points. So here the first of these, the definition or the nature of wisdom. It is said that it says that the bodhisattva's wisdom relates to the thorough analysis of phenomena that engages or has engaged all of what is to be known, or all objects of knowledge, and that operates through focusing on the 5 types of knowledge, and they are Buddhist knowledge, grammar, logic, technical arts, and medicine. Secondly, the means by which we enter into the development of wisdom itself. And this requires us to really gain kind of a powerful aspiration to practice. And this is done through really becoming aware of the benefits of wisdom and the faults or the disadvantages of not generating wisdom. And so with regard to the former, or indeed in general, we can say that if one has wisdom, then one is able to clearly ascertain the qualities of a situation and indeed the faults of a situation, and thereafter have a much better kind of expertise really of overcoming or eradicating mental affliction and augmenting all good qualities. And this is borne out in the fact that when we when accompanied with wisdom, that, for example, the affectionate, powerful, even though we have powerful, affectionate love for all sentient beings, that quality of affectionate love will not be contaminated even slightly by attachment. And with wisdom, though we have a long, enduring, powerful compassion which can't bear to see all sentient beings suffering, that compassion will not be compromised by sort of a kind of a laziness which arises because we are overcome by the burden of that distress. So wisdom eradicates that too. And certainly also when we have limitless joy, that wisdom ensures that our mind never wavers from the kind of the job of benefiting sentient beings. And when we have even a great enduring equanimity or impartiality in our minds, that wisdom ensures that we do not neglect the focus of working for the benefit of sentient beings even for one moment. And so indeed wisdom removes all that would kind of counteract these good qualities.
다 간제 간제 데려도 다 간제 군조배 셔답다 된다배 셔답니데 아니 가서도 야고딩에 안티 군조배 셔답다 된다배 셔답니다 란줄라 대소나 아니 저게 람냥소 라와인데다 샬라 편바 두바인데다 그래 제바인데 까세메 가져와지 그러나 저그 뭐유게 내주도 투베토네 아니 다 지금 자와두 그러와 뭐유게 내주 투베토네 자와두 그래 아니 뭐유게 내주도 투베토네 자와두 온데 거저게 거서데 까세메 가져와지 열봐 semchu chaye to kangai te ko muyu ge nesu kayin ba to ta ma zu kangai te de ka so mo zu je ge muyu ge nesu me ba to ne je de kangai te samlo tang da de muyu ge nesu me ba to ne samlo tang wa de ne ani kangai te de ji semchu chaye de ma ji ba yong de ani de ta ma tu ye yong de ge yor ba ta kunzo be ne dang ge zhou dang ya bu shi kunzo be ne dang ge zhou dang di to ne ani da ju kunzo be kangai ge ji se ku yu na kunzo be de da ge ji ku ne tu ye de de 아니 대다 됩니다. 뭐유게 내서 타도 받아 란싱 마주와 셰베 토네. 아니 거 제가서 디 시대나 때네. 아니 가서다. 다 톡다 봐서 내주 차상지 신고해 봐서. 토마 그데스 제고요. 그래서 아무 그데스 땅고요. 아니 딜 때네 저부 그데스 요구요 메티. 아니 봐도 그데스 제고요 메. 타 때데스 용구데스 그 차상 제거다. 가서 저 roadmap 소리 하고 되죠. 아니 강에도 책을 요 말아 봐. 강에도 채워도 강에 채야 되게 대대신에 요구 요래서 뭐 좋아도 아니 그디 모양과 제 탑시 대제 두고 요 봐.
So what it's saying here too, that when we bring both the conventional aspect and the ultimate aspect of wisdom to bear on any situation, we give ourselves every chance of being able to fulfill that particular activity or project in the best possible way. In other words, that what we are doing is by infusing our thinking with conventional and ultimate wisdom, we are gaining an ever clearer picture of the actual reality of the situation. And when we know the ins and outs of it from the conventional point of view, what we know how to, looking into how to actually proceed in reality, what problems that might be encountered, and what kind of tactics I need to employ to overcome or to avoid such problems, indeed how it might look in the end, what the final product might be of this action or this project, that we're gaining more and more data, conventionally speaking, to bring to bear on how to best initiate, how to proceed, how to bring it to completion. And then we have, from the point of view of the ultimate wisdom, looking into the actual ultimate nature of that reality, its lack of inherent existence, and giving that a context. So it's so important that we do all this, and indeed we can see that when we try to practice, indeed in any of the ways that have been enumerated here through our levels of affectionate love, compassion, joy, equanimity, that the shortcomings that we come across, the kind of like frustrations, the fatigue, the disillusionment, the discouragement, that we often even fertilize and nourish, is due to a lack of the clarity of the actual reality of the situation. We don't have even the big picture or the small picture clearly, and so that allows all of these debilitating aspects of our thinking to overcome us. So it's very important that these aspects of wisdom allow us to become far more efficient in terms of accumulating virtue, and far more efficient in terms of fulfilling our own purposes and the purposes of others. The third of the outlines are the divisions of wisdom, and they are the wisdom which knows the ultimate reality, wisdom which knows conventional reality, and the wisdom which works for the benefit of sentient beings. So the first of these, the wisdom which knows ultimate reality, has two subdivisions. And the first of these is a wisdom which knows or cognizes the reality of selflessness by means of what's known as a meaning generality, or indeed a conceptual understanding. And the second of these is a wisdom which is able to cognize reality directly.
류당 셈데나 류기 차샤 파체네 니가 요 말이야 셈 간지가 파 예와체네 니가 요 말이야 나는 나 매바리에서는 나 매바지 말이야 나 요바데 나 기부도 나 기부도 녀에 두고 요리 그 대두고 소화시도 와 대두고 소화시도 땅나 요당에 돈에 개발쇼고 요리 나 요당에 돈에 나 요당에 나라서 나왔네 신게 유대는 주바지 나왔네 신게 아니 나 가서 라 유대는 주바지 나왔네 신게 지금 여봐서 때는 나왔네 신게 나지 여러베스 라바이나 뭐다지 매디고 요래 티 매바지 멋지고 요래
So, in relation to the first of these subheading, the wisdom which cognizes the reality of selflessness by means of a meaning generality or a concept, a conceptual understanding, and this arises through reasoning. So, when we apply kind of reflective reasoning to the problem, we may be able to reach that sort of ascertainment or conclusion on the basis of that reasoning. So, we take the topic of our investigation, myself, me, and the question is, it feels like I really do exist, and there's a real me within this kind of combination of body and mind, and it's like this, like I am sort of ruler or king over body and mind. I dictate what my mind and body do. It appears like that. And so it's sort of like, it seems obvious. So the question is, if it does exist like that, and thereafter I analyze more internally within body and mind, I should be able to find that sort of self, because it appears that it is kind of self-established within the body and mind. So you do that. You look into the body, the different parts of the body, or the body as a whole, and then you go into the different parts of the body. You look at the consciousness or the mind as well. Again, looking at the different parts of the mind, and you kind of reach a point where you don't find anything that appears like that. That is self-established, sort of a king-like I or self that stands out. There's nothing that you can point to that kind of fulfills those criteria. And so you might be in danger of thinking that, okay, it doesn't exist. That's not correct. That now the question is, so how does such a notion exist? Because I still have that feeling. I say, I am happy. I am unhappy. And there are feelings to go along with those thoughts. So there's some sense of a self there. But how does it exist? Does it exist in the way that it appears to me? And then I kind of apprehend that? No. When we kind of reach a point of our analysis where we go, actually no. It does not exist in the way it appears. And it's like you're reaching at that point of analysis when you kind of come to some sense of ascertainment with regard to that. Actually, my notion of me, my notion of self, does not exist in the way that it appears. Just that recognition is gaining an insight into the true nature of reality.
그나 나베기 슈네 소예가 동반니 세다. 하도도 다다데 오마 탄주베 루는 소야 동반니 세다. 동반니 생인데 코라 저 매베 된 말이야. 동반니 생인데 다 여당 된대시면도 요 말이야. 쓰죠 봐. 봐. 여당 된대시면도 요 말이야. 쓰죠. 여당한테 못 되기도 봐. 다 된대 뭐 인상 같이 탈도바이나 안 류다 셈라 랑기 류셈라 나 딱잠 소치 나 딱잠 소치 오다 덴데지게 딱잠 덴데지게 나 유베 고쳐 되겠지.
And so, but we're still then left as to, okay, so how should I understand the status of self or me? So if it doesn't exist in the way that it appears, how does it exist? And like we hear the term emptiness quite a lot in context of Buddha's teachings, and in particular teachings on the middle way view. And so that can be misinterpreted when we hear emptiness. We say, oh, things, there's an emptiness of a self. But that's not what it understands. That's not what it means. That's not what should be understood. So it's empty. When we have the a notion of a self existing in the way it appears, or our normal way of understanding the status of self, that's how emptiness is applied. Say, you are empty of existing in that way. You are empty of existing in the way that you appear. So that's how it's to be applied. And when you look into it, ultimately, then you will say that, how do I exist therefore? You exist by being merely imputed on the basis of your body and mind. So you're just merely labeled on the basis of your body and mind. And so this is the way in which how self exists should be understood. So, interestingly, it's so important to understand that initially it's vital to understand how we cannot be truly established, how self or I cannot be truly established. In other words, to understand how we cannot exist in the way that we think we exist. That is actually key to understanding emptiness. So it's kind of like you come at it from in a backwards way, to see how things cannot exist in the way they are, and that kind of obliterates the mistaken point of view in order to open up the actual meaning of emptiness itself properly.
다 라완의 두바이나 주었잖아 태요 말다. 그 라완의 두사들. 그 주어준 태에 매대. 주어다. 주어지 태고 요바이나. 니까 딱 가르던 거 라완의 마주가 따디 대대고 요래.
So that because when you follow through and say, okay, if I was a self-established entity, really implicit in that, when you follow that through, there can be no change enacted on that entity. It is impervious to any kind of change, any kind of transformation. It must be a static permanent entity. And because that blatantly contradicts my reality, that I can see actually I'm always changing, constant fluidity, that automatically then should negate the idea of any sort of being, any sort of self-established entity idea. You see that such a notion, such an entity lacks any existence.
다 nga singa rawan ga duwa ina ane nga ke se yo mari nga ke se duwa nga peda mo ke ga zi yo ba ba de zi yo ba ke ga nga ke be du je de zi yo mari nga lo che de yo mari nga ane she che de yo mari ane nga ko ba ina yin ya de mo ta ba de tam ji je mo to be yo ma ko ane ta le yo mari ka rawan duwa ma yin ba yin za ane ka sa nga 게 요래 나 시에 요래 나 경고 차에 요래 나 시에 친구 차에 요래 그러와 나 다가서데 어제 코안에 탄에 타바터에 요래 탐색게만 토베 요래 그래서 그 라왕게 마주바 님바 인자 그 릭팀 가서 릭팀에 줄래 릭팀에 되고 요한 친구도
So if it was the case that I was a self-powered, self-established self or entity of self, then just the reality of that means that I could not be born. I could not age. I could not aspire to liberation or the omniscient state of enlightenment. There's no change, no alteration can be enacted on such an entity. So, again, because this flies in the face of even conventional reality, I can see how actually I am born, actually I am aging and getting older and older. I practice, I can refine the mind to eventually attain the state of liberation, even the omniscient state of enlightenment. This automatically negates the notion that I had to be a self-established, self-powered entity.
동해디 못해 두고 요래. 그래서 동해 못는 동해 육 세쳐 두고 요래. 아니 동해디 세쳐네 동해 육 매버서네 아니 나 타바도 탐지 잡아 두다. 사줄랑아 라나 사제 고마 두고 요래. 그래서 아니 그 때네 중앙 임바 인자 아니 릭트베 줄래 릭트베 되고 용투했지.
And so what this shows is that too, that actually things proceed in accordance with a consistent relationship between cause and effect. And if certain cause is established, it will lead to that corresponding or harmonious result. And so this is the way of things. I can see this. I can see how this works. I can see how that when I proceed with the understanding that I lack this self-powered or self-established reality, that actually because I recognize suffering, my own suffering, that because I can recognize my own suffering, then I am have the impulse to seek out what the causes of that suffering might be. Then I can actually eradicate the causes, and because of that practicing on the path and on the grounds, proceeding, refining the mind more and more and more, I can see for myself the harmonious relationship between cause and effect.
근데 이 말이자 다 경제 삼로 땅 경제 삼로 마다나 네가 네가 말이다. 그래서 뭐죠 나에 대해 유대는 두 번단 거 나왔다도 zimbi sheba komba shuk chambu shibujo bada komba shuk chambu shibujo re dende yinba yinza ko gyumtsen to na yana yado samatane ani moyo ge nezu shimba che ani moyo ge nezu shimba de ani ta rangi mitsi nala dedu kade chunga yinba ne pa chane jotuba che kruwa ta digi moyo ge nezu tada ngotumda togu yomari de yina ya gyumtsen to na samatane ta dima do josa mindu 다가랑 레샤 사장 예반예도 같이 예반예배 토네는 다 로로 컴퓨터네 데데데 다까지 제가 소름 다다 가래 다 다음에 된지수가 또 제베 아니 시랍 레고로 와 그래서 되는 거 받들다 된지수기 또 아니 가자서한테 고모도 아니 곰 아니 데 곰종으로 깨네 다 간제지 당부 디시바제 최종의 시랍제 최종의 시럽게 씹어잡을 참아 샤바제네 아니 양도를 제바제네 랑도게 씹어잡을 편토고 말해 신고에 계신 버리대 얘네들 최종의 시럽다 남길랍게 돼 야베 시럽서 신기 시럽을 상기 시럽 말 다디 양도 삼도다네 삼도 좀 제마고 거는 삼도다네 아니 랑도고 녀바타마진 삼종의 시럽제 삼종의 시럽제 뭐다 디모도 또 삼도 스토인 녀바들 아니 다 가서 검자매 아니 데 모습도 또 봤어요. 아니 돈이 모습도 또 언제 다 같이 제 어다 그래 모습 또 보고는 제 와서 저도 가서 제 와서 그때 직접 가서 다음에 돈지스고 제 와도 모습도 주고 거는 제 와서 다 같이 모습도 또 하네. 다 모습도 또 왔들라야 좀 봐 보여래. 다 모습도 또 왔들라야 다 같이 저 가서 다 뒤잖아. 그래 다 같이 토람 통원도 모습도 또 주고 모습도 또 저다 네, 사당분이야. 다까지서 사고가 사주가부터 다까지 아니, 네, 너무 차라체는 체 다까지 너무 갑자기 잔두고 열어봐. 아니 다 참이 참못되다. 자세 사주배 빠네. 아니, 되는 남들 하셔도 사대고바 톱두고 열어. 어디를 쳐.
So reasoning needs to be applied, and indeed, in order to establish the kind of conviction about this, we need to apply reasoning ubiquitously, again and again and again, because in the fact of the matter is that this apprehending of our self-entity, the way it appears, the mistaken way, is so strongly habituated in our minds that we constantly do it automatically. And so we're really starting at the other side of really trying to chip away at that sort of edifice of mistaken understanding, and to gain some sense of conviction in that. And that means that we try to do everything we can to perceive the reality of each moment, and that to be able to gain a sort of understanding that we can apply in our everyday lives, and to reach a point where we see that actually there's no alternative to this correct point of view, that things lack this kind of existence in the way they appear. They completely lack that sort of existence. There's no alternative to kind of like seeing things as merely imputed by thought, and to kind of see that in your everyday life is so important to counteract the powerful habituation to the wrong point of view, and that this then is kind of like slowly again nourishing the seed of the wisdom of selflessness that we need to come to, and that this is a process that has to be approached very kind of like strategically. We begin with our wisdom arising from learning, gaining the facts, but we know that this is another powered sort of assimilation of information, and so we need to to really hone that in the crucible of analysis, of wisdom arising from contemplation, to make it a self-powered, self-owned information. That way we can more genuinely and sincerely apply it in our daily lives. And then it is brought to its completion in the wisdom arising from meditation. So this is what leads to the direct realization, that second category of wisdom that we looked at in the subheadings, of the wisdom that sees things directly. And this is what we're aiming for. But, even a direct realization of emptiness has many levels to it. It's saying that we gain this direct realization initially simultaneous with the attainment of the path of seeing. But that corresponds with the first of the 10 grounds of a bodhisattva. And as we proceed along the 10 grounds, we eradicate or abandon more and more obscurations as we go along, until we get to the most subtle obscurations on the 10th ground and can eradicate those to eventually attain the state of enlightenment.
이제 돈이 고속도 또 사도 안에 내가 토랑 전에 아니 뒤에 가서 머리가 온게 딱 가서 단지 머리가 온게 딱 가서 저딱 저거 과게 레사도 사오려 뭐 이말 딱 가서 사매 레사도 그러와.
One crucial attainment, really, at the when we directly perceive emptiness for the first time, and at the path of seeing, is that thereafter we no longer accumulate karma, which is contaminated by the ignorance of self-grasping. And so thereafter the karma we accumulate is classified as uncontaminated karma. So it's kind of like that, not that will directly lead us into cyclic existence.
가자티 개좀 가르쳐 차고 열었으나 나랑 저기 가서도 나랑도 나도 밑에 동가 못는지 영어 되기도 와. 영어 되게 가르쳐는 연구 열었으나 가르쳐는 연구 열었으나 나랑 저 코아바 있어 영어 되고 열어. 코아바 있어 영어 되고 열어. 다 동네들 교회 동네 교회 동네 잡아도 제가 동네였어. 네. 다 동네도 다 지금 강에 채대도 제시샤 잡아 말이 두두가 하고 열어. 두두게 하고 되지 와. 다 차와 뒤에 가서 가서 유에 동네데 또 스테이션 맞잖아 하고 도요 말이야. 또 스테이션 맞잖아 하고 도요 말이야. 얘네 뒤야 이 집에 이제 남배초 인구가 말이야. 출루시 받아내 대시 요리 주에도 믹스게 힌두고 출루 듣도 나올라. 지 가서래. 지금 가서래. 약간 제 대시 주에도 약간 제 소화 대화를 맞잖아요. 소화 따는 고백이 아니 감고만 되고 걔네 지에들 남들이 받는 용티고 요래. 얘네다 대장 말에 다 개치를 가서 뭐 차바 뒤에 그 동네에 마바나. 차바 뒤에 그 동네에 마바나. 아니 자 가서 못네 아니 지금 내가 우리 동네에서 매봐 이네 동네 때도 매봐 차고 요 말이야. 그 차바 뒤에 그 동네에 마바나 아니 뒤 아니 단대 동네 교회 동네 temba치에 가서 동네 능력지에 마음발에 교회 동네 라서가 되게 아니 가서 제에 되게 제대로 와. 그래서 차바 뒤에 그 동네도 뭐 맞잖아 편도. 다 차바 뒤에 그 동네도 파파 또 가려서나 아니 아주 풍부 야행 연상 자야 돼. 사전 여월에 풍부도 양의 양도 렌데 와. 다 사전 여월에 풍부도 양의 양들 렌데 그 라왕의 두바이나 탑시 자원이네 요 말이야. 그 탑이 매무서 요 말이야. 다 되게 라바네. 그 라왕의 마두바 인자 그 가리도 그 교견을 되는 요 되게. 교견 다 되는 요 되도 다 야야 되는데 아니 가서다 레 가서다 레 구조다. 레 구조야도 녀모 보죠 가서 단지 머리 봐. 다 단지 머리 봐들 투한테 단지 말이 막 코란들 로래 다도 좀 봐. 그래 봐. lore de ne danzi kasoda danzi da dende da do zimba jige da de marikba di yu rawang do dubati ko yu la me de genchi ani yobati ko tuba de lok시 chate yu da di meba sovala an meba sola di nyebo yu me ta ko yu ra nyebo su kapte nyebo da di nyebo de dame do be sharap sikete ko rashi ko ma tuba yimba kasa rashi ko tuba de an yu 매바 지 요바 진대고 되는데 유디 매바로 왔다 유디 매도 아니 디 독조 라싱 그 마주바디 그 요바로 왔다 라싱 그 마주바디 요 인도 아니 디 디도 로직 다 랑규를 여다 매대 내줄로 가는데 얘네 디 도베 로직 용쳐야지 그 라싱 그 마주바 요바 인자 안디 도베 로직 다 랑규를 여매리 켜바 레데 얘네 rangyul yume keba remato an tende lochi yudeji yukuran yuba inzang ane di rangyul gechoyeji ta di kyawangdu ane dame tobe sherab da meba tobe sherab kyawangdu dadu tube zimbe sherab di dema tuba chayeji ane dila tene ane dadu zimbe tene ane 녀모게 다 안딜라데네 아니 가서 레사야 되게 매바 차트예지 아니 딜라데네 다가자지 때도 아니 되게 좀 되죠 되게 다 돼서 개체 못 차대 봐 진짜 뭐 머리 차서 가시라
So, kind of like encompassing all of this is the importance of our recognizing how much suffering we are undergoing in cyclic existence, how much we are prone to suffering in cyclic existence. And like we know about the three categories of suffering. The first being suffering of suffering, which is really talking about the pain, mental and physical, that we go through, that it doesn't require any explanation. Even animals we can see are suffering in this way. So that's quite obvious. We suffer so much in that sense. But then also we suffer what's called suffering of change, and that requires some explanation to really get to, but it's not just that this is a facet of Buddha's teachings, but it's in other spiritual traditions as well, namely Hindu schools of thought, where they kind of really understand suffering at this level. And in their teachings there's the requirement to pacify the mind, to reach a certain equilibrium of mind, and eradicate attachment, to overcome this level of changing or suffering of change. And that but when it comes to the third level of suffering, which is called the pervasive suffering, this is a characteristic of all those who are in cyclic existence, regardless of how well they seem to be doing or not. That in fact it's synonymous with cyclic existence. And so we really need to understand this level of suffering, and understand that without being able to overcome that or to eradicate that, we will never get beyond suffering. So you may have some temporary relief from the suffering of suffering, or even the suffering of change, but the very fact of being in cyclic existence means you are, as it were, under the control of the pervasive suffering. And indeed, it's so insidious too that this suffering not only is a suffering in itself, but it induces the other two, suffering of suffering and a suffering of change also. And so what is pervasive suffering? It is the very fact of being born again and again into cyclic existence on the basis of what are known as contaminated and appropriated aggregates of body and mind. And so this continuum of body and mind, being born again and again and again, is actually pervasive suffering. So when it's kind of like that suffering needs to be understood at that level, and that and the fact that this really equates to the cyclic existence, because it's predicated on this ignorance that comes at the very root of cyclic existence. So it begins with the source of suffering as being as laid out in the four Arya truths. Source of suffering is karma, and the source of suffering is the afflictive emotions. And when we look into the afflictive emotions source, we come to the root of cyclic existence, and ignorance, grasping at the true existence of a self-entity. And so here it is this is nothing more than a mind that is mistaken with regard to its object. It regards something that doesn't actually exist to exist. And so it's sort of this exaggeration that predicates all other kind of thoughts that come after the attachment, the aversion, the karma that's created, and so on, and this continuing into this continual taking on of the appropriated, contaminated aggregates that equates with pervasive suffering. So this is the mind, the object of which is mistaken, that we need to correct, and so this is where we develop the wisdom of selflessness. So we see the problem of seeing something or ourselves as being that which is inherently existent or inherently established, and we cultivate the wisdom that sees the emptiness of that proposition, the selflessness of such an entity. And when we establish that antidote wisdom in our minds, when we have that present in our minds, there is no place for the mistaken inherently existent self idea to abide. Both are mutually exclusive. You can't have one and the other at the same time. So it's important that we can see that there is a viable antidote, a viable way of training to develop and cultivate such a wisdom of selflessness, to act as direct antidote to this mistaken way of holding holding onto a mistaken idea. So so it's sort of like when we strengthen that antidotal selflessness, that wisdom, we are less likely to operate under the realm of ignorance. Thereafter, we will be not prone to operating under the realm of mental affliction. Therefore, we won't be containing, or we won't be laying down imprints of contaminated karma, and so we can look forward to the actual gaining the happiness that we want, and indeed overcoming the suffering that we do not want.
Okay. That 단다데 가소려 단다데 담에도베 시라 귤레기에데 게지 못 찾을 거야 규지 못 찾아 다이 이나야 다뭐 남장 담에도 단데 좀뭐 삼도스 코아 저기 올랍자 용어 맞게 버티 지금 말이야 가서 말아도 다 매발에 삼도당 이네 나라도 다도 좀 같이 별로지 슈치무 시부지 여봐 이네 다들 삼로 찍다니다 숨다 안 간장서 곰곰곰곰곰곰인데 그렇게 누가 슈치도 좋대지 그래서 단다 남장어서 다 매발에서 좀 제를 삼도도 도스 이네야 좀 제를 삼도다 다 팀도 조사면도 삼도다 그 다도 집에 로디 라그 섹스 구조 스테이크 요래 그 누가 슈치도 좋대 구조 스테이크도 와 더버데 지고 니고 소가 무티니 데레 삼도다 집에 있나 남신아 아니고 가서네 다도 마주바디 거지그 공부 탐에도 패다 걸 잡대 참아 요래 다도 집에 로데 걸로 주바다 검시가 온 용어되고 요래면 걸 잡대 참아 요 말이야 안디 이제 거지그 공부 탐에도 패고 싶고도 와
So it's very important to approach the cultivation of such wisdom cause by cause, because the notion of an existent self, in whatever way we consider it to exist, this truly existent, inherently existent self idea, is extremely powerfully embedded in our thinking, and so we need to really habituate to the opposite of that, the antidote to that things lack such an existence, that self does not exist in that way, and that we need to gradually habituate more and more to reach a point really where we are constantly, we reach a kind of a eureka moment again and again where we say, actually things have to be this way. Things have to lack any true existence. Self lacks any true existence, any inherent existence. It has to be this way. It can't be any other way. And so, when you kind of really reach that sort of point of realization, really, that this really shakes the foundation of what we have been so habituated to since beginningless time, and it's very important to kind of shake that wrong view again and again and again. So it's understand too that what we are applying in our practice of applying the antidote of selflessness is backed up by valid reasoning, whereas the wrong view, even though it's very habituated, is not backed up by valid reasoning. So it can be eradicated, and indeed the wisdom that furnishes our selflessness, because it is backed up by valid reasoning, can be developed to its completion.
라싱가 마주가 삼로당 받세주는 많이 받아 라싱가 마주가 삼로당 또 마디시에 똥샤샤르서 어디 야버리 그래서 먼저 다도 좀 받으면 다도 좀 로디 슈치 와서 가고 슈치 배진되고 여봐서 다도 마주가래 서디 걸 삼로당도 또 똥샤샤 마디시시 제티 다도 좀 로디라 구조스티고 여봐 구조스티고 여래
And so then, as a result of one's reflection, as a result of one's analysis of this not finding things to exist in the way that they appear, in other words, to really gaining kind of like a point of an end point with regard to the object of negation, when at that point you, if you feel actual manifest discomfort or feeling some fear or being unsettled, that's a very good sign. It's a very good sign, because what you have really done is really genuinely poked at and really upset the kind of incumbent established idea of you being inherently existent, and that this is a kind of a really good kind of like getting at the heart of the matter in a good way.
당 말아도 다 때와도 뒤 말이야. 다 때와도 다도 두어 집어들이도 와. 다도 딜라 때네. 아니 먼저 거 잘. 가서 딜라 때네. 아니 차다가 로게 상조라 차 셔줘야 땅. 딜라 때네. 래 나조가 싸잖아. 밑에 두면 나조가 용되지.
So when we talk of enemy, this is actually the real enemy. This mind which apprehends a truly established self. This is the real enemy, because as a result of that, following on from such a notion, an idea, we develop attachment, and then we develop aversion, and on the basis of that we accumulate, we kind of give free rein to the mental afflictions that follow on from such attachment and aversion. And of course then, as a result of actions done and motivated by those mental afflictions, we lay down karmas on the mind stream that lead to further suffering. And so that this also, of course, isolates ourselves in opposition to the other. So it's self and other out there. And that what we need to cultivate is the fact of the interdependence of myself and other. That I can only actually even describe myself in relation to independence on the other out there. And the other, in turn, is the other independence upon me being here. So there's a complete interdependence. It flies in the face of this isolationist thinking.
배는 차샤바이나 배는 먼저 컨트롤 시켜온데 지금 미지가 직독자라 컨트롤 시켜온데 소소로 내가 얘기했는데 피해도 상상 자자도 그 노들이 상상 지금 라나 용도도 하고 라마는 두번 신대도 용되고 여 봐. 좋아. 라마는 좀 돼가지. 예. 그때 라면은 피게 내가 얘기했지만 내가 얘기한 대다 라니한테 저식 좀 보시고 차대고 여다. 얘네 자자 갈아 간참 좀 소소로 라리 되고 여다. 이 촌삼로 거거든.
So we can see this play out, for example, when anger arises from another, maybe if somebody is negative who has engaged in some harmful activity. So we have this very strong certainty in our own minds, of them being the negative person out there. Not only that, but they're 100% in the wrong. That this is the affirmation, the wrong affirmation of them being really fully independently established out there, and that separate from me, separate from everything else, and that this is the kind of the fertilization of that wrong view, that they are really inherently existent and 100% inherently wrong as well. So this is in spite of the fact that there's a complete interdependence here, that if they haven't got an object to be harmful to, there wouldn't be. There's a complete interdependence. I'm here, they're there. This incident could not arise without both of us together. That's not part of the thinking, even though that's the reality of the situation when anger takes over.
그래서 규ген 망고지가 초 안데가 너바 계겐다 너바 계사가 유니 초 안데 규gen 망고지 초자고 너바 계겐 되게 두방으로 와 네가 초는 연구도 와 안데 매베 규gen 샤바야 망고 연구도 와.
So there's so many causes and conditions at play in any situation like that, in particular in a situation like that. Like there's the harmer, the one who's being harmed, myself in that situation, and that it's a kind of like a completely mutually dependent scenario. Everything about it, and indeed so many other minute causes and conditions are playing out in order. The karma of the situation, the whole environment of the situation, etc., etc. All must be in place to kind of like bring this about.
어떤 뭐저 촌 연구도 이제 네가 그 소보다 피해도 상당히 된도 와. 어떤 간에 네가 뭔가 가서 그 다도 두 번째 먼저 숙처부 요다티 다도 두 번째 숙 가서 좋아 요 쪽에 안에 대주장은 역전의 숙총도 좀 되지. 아니 뭐 여기 내주도 카세트 세트 하고 되지.
And so that's but of course this is not part of our thinking. When we're angry like that, we just want to point at to blame, the finger of blame at the other person being 100% incorrect, and that this really establishes the self entity as really fully established or fully inherent as well at that. And so it's kind of like you can see the more there is of this solidly existent, fully established self, the more trouble, the more problems, the more angst and irritability and suffering there is as well.
never taken the Munajana Kako and Lagamogo Mozichiyorba. Koran never get, and so Kondosa might give a chair on you. And might give a chair that could never taken Kansatana, now might give a Korkibuyorba. Munajana, when the Koran never gave a Yena, so you can do Shimbetone, Konto Masan, Kibuch and Devayina, and quite successful Junior Marwa. Timajo and that Kasata, the John was of Chavara. That was it. Koran never gave a ten, and once the Tado to the Lotti, she wanted to dance and might give a 10 Konto Sun there and that was successful Shujorata. Could the Dagone Tura, that would never get a Shavina.
And so we can see in that sense too how if one is really a kind of an automatic pilot based on this abiding within the notion of a fully established self, expressing anger as a result of the harmer out there, it's sort of like it's such a it's such a cliched situation, a worldly cliched situation, it sort of like it affirms the harmer's behavior because they have been successful in promoting anger in you, and actually you're really telling them that you're affirming their behavior. I wanted to harm, I got the result, I'm happy, I'm going to do it again, and so on. Whereas if you really understood that there's kind of no self to be harmed in this instance, that I can actually stay cool and not get angry, then they're expending a lot of energy for no reason, and that they were kind of like really it punctures their enthusiasm to engage in harm. So they kind of don't get the profit of what they're doing. They get some loss out of that situation. It's a waste of energy from their point of view. So you can see the total difference in terms of worldly terms of the difference in one's reaction, how one responds in a situation like that. So this also, of course, we can see that once, whether it's anger or any other mental affliction, once that is rises in the mind, then wisdom has no room to play. Wisdom does not take part in what happens next. And so in terms of really ascertaining the reality of any given situation, we can see that when anger is reduced, when mental afflictions are not given a free rein, this allows some space for wisdom to take over and to kind of take part. And so this can only be for our profit, our benefit. And so we can see that even when we are being able to apply whatever understanding of conventional and ultimate wisdom we have, there is a benefit to that, even in the worldly sense, even in the common everyday life, quite apart from gaining a sense of the ultimate nature of reality and so on.
풍부차 먹고 좀발라 되는 풍부 스타시 저러면서 풍부스 모두 예 류스게 좋아해 라바 강바 다 되게 강가라 고다 강가라 아니 저기 로아치마 강가 저는 예 풍부 스타시 저스도 다 라바 코라라 제 좋아이네 고다 되게 참모는 바이야나 뺐다 하장을 참모는 바이야와 쳐봐이네 라바스 이거도 예 풍부스게 된 얘기면도 와. 딱 속발아 딱 삼절해도 와. 딱 삼절해도 와. 나든 딱 한가다래. 교육 뒤에 채되는데 교육 마 뒤에 채이네라. 딱 가자 저 라다 현 수인 바이네. 거기 가서다 딱 또배 딱 삼절 딜레 심바지 메되네. 딱 또배 딱 삼그 땡네. 아니 저기 대두가 남자들 샤도에지.
And so we consider this notion of self, that it really lacks any inherent existence or any true existence, that is really merely labeled or imputed in dependence upon the body and the mind, the body or set of aggregates and the mind. So we might get the notion too that like the body or the aggregates, the physical aggregates, have some sort of true existence within themselves. So you can engage in the analytical division of the parts of the body as well, and to kind of refute each in turn by looking at the leg or the hand, and looking into, like, the notion that somehow the hand is something that is truly independently established, but seeing that actually if you look for that sort of true independent established hand, we look into we see that actually the hand is made up of parts, which automatically negates that notion. There's fingers, there's a palm of the hand, there's the different parts of the hand. Go into any level of detail that you wish, and so this can be applied to any other part of the body, that which appears to be truly existent or established, when analyzed, when searched for, is not found. And the not finding of that is affirming that actually the hand and the parts of the hand and the body and everything else is merely imputed. It's merely labeled, merely imputed by thought. And this goes for self, this goes for others. And so the more we understand that too, the more we can kind of correctly proceed on the basis of the true reality of the situation, and that all is merely imputed by thought.
왔다 여단데 때내 좋아하면도 조사면도 삽삽자 때내 좋아 임바 인자 다 라완은 조바스다 용사면도 때내 좋아 인자 라완은 좁두고 매바 따대 라완은 좁고 매바 인자 다디 여단데 때내 좋아하면 되게 직변 직조 조토이지 다 되게 직변 직조 조토에 네바야 보진 네바이나 근데 동네 고아 가서 찾아버려 되면도 조사면 되겠지 라왕게 마주와 딜라테네 아니 때내 좋아를 고아쇼치야 때내 좋아 이마 인자 라왕의 주발 고아쇼치고 숙제도 좋도이지.
So that nothing therefore is found beyond their being merely imputed by thought. So that is this then reciprocal reasoning of considering that things lack any true existence or any independent existence leads to the conclusion that things and phenomena must arise independent. They are dependent phenomena, and that because phenomena are dependent, they therefore cannot have any true or inherent or independent existence. And so you play back one reasoning against the other like this, and to kind of really gain more and more a clarity of understanding what constitutes a lack of true existence or independent existence, and how that thereafter must lead to the conclusion, the inevitable conclusion, that all phenomena arise in dependence. So, for example, the subject I or self, it lacks any true existence. Why? Because it arises in dependence. So that, and then the other way around, that because it is a dependent origination or a dependent arising, that it can't arise, it cannot be a truly arising entity. So they kind of like, it shows this as a correct reasoning, and so because it is a dependent origination, it precludes it being a truly existent phenomena. In other words, that this reasoning pervades, is what is said. So, and so a reflection, an example, or the instance is given as the reflection in a mirror. So it's very, very important to constantly, as it were, feed our minds with this juxtaposition of the reasoning, because phenomena are the dependent originations. They cannot exist truly. They cannot exist independently. They cannot exist objectively. To kind of really see this, apply this in our everyday, as we're going around, that when we look at something, say that something appears to our mind, and but we remind ourselves automatically that it does not exist in the way that it appears. Yes, it appears. I can see it, but it does not exist in the way that it appears. So you really are, like, as it were, feeding this correct view into your thinking, more and more and more, as a matter of course. You really need to develop that familiarity, that habituation. And so yes, it appears, but it does not exist in the way that it appears. It is a dependent origination. It arises in dependence on, and so on.
shopping center, the cover drawing there. Can you tell coffee to don't tell me or something that's done? They are not there, you tend to one, no one as you are. You tend to do not, Round to put it. Round told him to go chash and attend to what he shall. So, and it then I met the day in bed, just start to square some down the arena. Continue, if you tend to do what the you tend to do what the battle continuing there, and the coach shook on the tire, touch you on the
So whether we're in the shopping center, sitting for a coffee, or anything that we're doing, when we're observing around, just to see that things that appear, yes, it appears, but it does not exist in the way that it appears. And how does it appear? It appears like it really does exist objectively, for example. And so we say, But when I put that to any sort of analysis, I can see that actually it is arising only in dependence upon a whole array of causes and conditions, for example, that bring it about. And so we bring that sort of a brief analysis to affirm the way things actually exist against the ways that they do not exist. So we can apply this in every possible instance, even to the point of looking at the Buddha. So again, the Buddha lacks any objective existence. Buddha is merely imputed, and that to kind of like gain conviction with regard to that point, we just need to consider how the Buddha actually trained on the path for 3 countless great eons, developed the mind of enlightenment, accumulated all the merit, eradicated all negativities, perfected all good qualities. This is all completely utterly impossible if the Buddha was truly objectively existent. It can only happen because the Buddha is established merely imputed and in dependence upon all these different causes and conditions. So we leave it there for today. So we do the Lam Rim prayer. From my 2 collections, vast space that I have amassed from working with effort at this practice for a great length of time, may I become to you.
Compassion, not in the true existence, and the true master of flawless wisdom, as well as Vajrapani, destroyer of hordes of demons without exception,
Some
carpet crowns your sage land of snows. I sing driver at your feet I make requests.